CS world is abuzz with the return of RpK to Titan, although admittedly they were called Very Games when he left the team. And within the context of where Titan is as a team right now, this is very exciting news because Kenny S is playing like the best player in the world. His statistics are amazing, his game impact is incredible, and at ESEA LAN, even just his performance alone was enough to almost get them a best of 3 win over Fnatic, to potentially have given them a chance to have a good run. But some other members of the team, they had to use IREC, their manager, an old school player, and a guy who retired, I think, late 2013 probably, early 2014. He hadn't played for quite a while. He really wasn't very good in game, and unfortunately Existence's level had really dropped, and then Maniac wasn't playing well, so it was pretty much Kenny S just dragging a bunch of people across the finish line. And even he couldn't do that. Even playing as like an incredible world-class best player in the world, he wasn't fully capable of that. So people kept asking, who's the 5th guy going to be in this Titan lineup? People thought maybe they bring Scream back, try with him again. They'd had him for a long time before. Maybe actually Kenny S gets poached. Some people suggested maybe he goes to LDLC. People didn't know, even though that seems unlikely since they won DreamHack Winter. But with all that said, there was a lot of buzz and people were wondering who can they possibly pick up now. A shock completely out of left field. RpK comes out of retirement and he's the new 5th player. So we've got all these questions to answer. First question, who's RpK? I'm sure lots of people who are modern day fans as CS has grown so much, they were long from joining into the community in the game when RpK had already retired. So take it back to the previous version of CS Source. Now playing from like 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, RpK was, by all accounts, one of the best Source players of all time. I've actually spoken to a number of famous Source pros over the years, actually in between while he was retired, and I always used to say to them, if they were from the French scene particularly, or just old school players anyway, I would always say how good actually was the RpK guy. Like, was he overhyped? Because I always want to know, like, if the community opinions like actually a bit off from certain players, because there's certain players in 1.6 who are very much overhyped and weren't quite as good as the opinion was, and all of them come back with like, no, this guy was the shit, he was like the best player ever. People either are in there's two camps. People either say that RpK was the best Source player ever, or they say Shox was the best Source player ever. It depends which criteria they go on. But in terms of overall best player, I've had a lot of people say RpK because for a number of years he was one of the best, if not the best in the whole world, the best in his team, definitely the driving factor behind his team's success. A great all-round player. And so you look at his success in Source, and he had something ridiculous like 40 or 50 first place finishes. Now you have to admit, not 100% of those are lands, and secondly, some of them are lands are small lands or just French lands. Admittedly, the French team was very good towards the end, but all of these lands aren't the same as winning like DreamHack Summer now or something like that, you know. But the best ones, so like certain DS rack lands or ESWC 2011, some of these results were big results. Even some of the I-Series were very competitive within the Western European scene. So some of these were very legit results, and he was one of the most successful players ever. And crucially, he was the main star of his team, Very Games. And he got to play with all these guys who you think of now at the top of the French scene. He got to play with Existence, got to play with Shox, got to play with MBK, got to play with Happy, got to play with Smiths. Played with all these guys at different points in his career. And obviously Existence, MBK, Smith, these were core members of Very Games for a couple of years, going into CSGO, of course. So in CSGO, he was part of the Very Games lineup that started the game out. And at the very first 4 events they went to, they finished 2nd place, and every single time they lost to NIP in the final. And NIP obviously went on their run with 87-0 and never defeated by anyone for 87 games. So yeah, Very Games didn't manage to defeat them, but crucially at that point, Very Games was by far the 2nd best team, and they could beat everyone else, and they had the tactical style, and they were playing great CSGO against everyone else. But against NIP they'd falter, they wouldn't look as good, they couldn't break through, they couldn't find a way. Sometimes they'd even get dominated on certain maps. It could be embarrassing sometimes. And so for whatever reason, he decided to step back, to retire. He wasn't going to play anymore. And in early 2013, he left, and they got in Scream to replace him. Scream was just known as like a star headshot making guy with some highlight clips. And they brought him in, and he came into the line, and obviously he'd been in Source as well, Scream had. They brought him in, and RpK just disappeared from the scene. We never heard from him again. But in that early period of CSGO, he was a very good player, actually. He was one of the best. He was probably overall the best player in Very Games at the time, because he was a good clutcher, good rifle specialist, pretty solid player, like good under pressure, hence why he was a good clutcher. And crucially at the time, I always thought NBK was pretty good at the time. He wasn't really anyone you could put any blame on in those early days. RpK was probably the best player overall, and then Kenny S was good, and he clearly had skill and talent and would show it, but he was like that not entirely realised talent yet. He was sort of the guy where they hadn't quite figured out how to use him, and he didn't necessarily know what his role was, and so yeah, that's why there was something off there. And so anyway, RpK retired, and now he's back. Now, when I thought about him coming back, because it was such a shock of the way he came back, especially because he fully retired, I immediately thought of that famous trope from Hollywood movies where it's usually sort of like an FBI profiler or some legendary cop, or maybe even like a spy or something, and he's retired. He's given up that lifestyle, you know. He's finally gotten out. He did his one last job. He got the last guy he was chasing. He did the last operation, and he goes, listen, I've got to retire now. He just goes away. And so what I'll do is I'll act out how I imagined they got him back, okay? How I imagined Existence got RpK back. And so what I'll do is, for lack of editing skills, I will just face this way when I'm Existence, and then I'll face this way when I'm RpK, okay? So get ready. Get ready for a potentially offensive, and mostly because of just how bad it's going to be, a French accent, okay? So set the scene for you here. Existence, he's got his Titan shirt on, he's coming out, and his hair gelled up like a guy out of Dragon Ball Z from Belgium. He's coming over the hills. He's in the hills of France, and he sees a figure who's got like a bunch of rabbits, dead rabbits, hung over his back on a wire that he's just caught freshly, and with sort of rough woodland clothing on, dirty clothes, just ambling towards a cabin. And Existence runs up there, and he says, and he realizes, he makes out like from this kind of brow beaten, sweating, dirty visage, it's actually RpK. And he says to him, he says Cedric, mon ami, I'm so glad I found you. It's been so long. And then RpK this time, he's like, oui, I told you to never come for me unless it was very important. What brings you here, mon ami? And then he says, mon frère, I know you said to let you go, but we need you. Good Frenchmen, they are dying. I came here to ask you to rouse the king. He's like, rouse him? Sacred blood, are you crazy? It's been so long. Brother, we need, mon frère, we need him. We need the Red King. I told you, Existence, I cannot live that life anymore. It has been so long. No, you don't understand. It's the Swedes. They are winning everything. They are killing fucking everybody. And also, the usurper NBK has gone with Shocks and Smiths, and he has joined up with Happy, and they are now the best. They have won the tournament that we always wanted to win, brother. It's like, what do you mean, Existence? They were always our friends. They were part of our team. Also, it's about Kenny. Kenny? What is it with Kenny? He was just a boy when I left. Yes, but he is more than, he is a man now, and he is fighting with the spirit of a lion, but it is not enough. We do not have enough to help him. Okay, god damn it. I'll come back. Okay, so aside from the fact that was obviously like an Academy Award winning performance by me of what I'm going to term a play called Existence Gets RpK Out of Retirement. So feel free to use that. That's going to be like public commons license. You can all act that out in like local community theatres or at school maybe for a project. So no, anyway, now we'll have some real analysis of the situation without dodgy French accents. So actually, when RpK retired, one of the reasons I always asked those source players afterwards, and others, and people like the guys out of Titan, what they really thought of RpK, is because I always thought he had more to give in the game, actually. I always had this what if, after I saw how the Scream experiment turned out, where he never really did fit in the team, and then they got rid of Kenny S and he became a great player. I always wondered, what if they could have not had RpK retire? He'd stayed in the lineup, and instead they'd gotten rid of Kenny S, because it does seem like getting rid of Kenny S is something that spurred his development, and so they'd gotten rid of Kenny S, but the move instead was to at that point get over whatever difficulties they had with shocks, where they had there was some sort of personality issue there, and just gotten shocks into the team. So they'd had RPK, they had MBK, they had shocks, Smiths, and Existence. To me, that could have been the team that could have kickstarted and even earlier on challenged Nip and been able to beat them and been able to turn things around and become the best team, actually. I always thought that could have been the case. And so, yeah, obviously, listen, I'm quite excited as well about his return now. Now, I don't expect him to be really, really good. I don't expect him to be the level he was at the end of CSGO. It's a totally different game now. It's been a long time. It's been 2 years since he played. Also, I don't expect him to live up to the level of Source. The level of competition wasn't as big as it is now, with the scale of things and how people going hardcore and having massive lands all the time. It just isn't the same case. That was a different world. That was years ago. It was like 7 or 8 years ago at this point in time. Maybe like 5 or 6. So, but even more so, he doesn't have to be. That's the key piece of analysis I'd put across in this video. He doesn't have to be the old RpK. He doesn't even have to be a god. He doesn't have to be anything. All he has to be, when you've seen how RpK, Existence, and Maniac were playing these last lands and they still had a chance, he just has to be serviceable. He just has to be a decent player who can give you 10, 15 frags. He just has to, if he can win a couple of 1v1s and 1v2s, great, that's a bonus. He just has to be decent under pressure, doesn't crumble. He just has to do his fucking job. If he can do all these things and he can hold a spot as CT, he can definitely help this team potentially win. Because at the moment, Kenny S is playing at unreal level. Some of the best CSGO I've ever seen. The best of his career. So he's like 1.5 times any other player almost in CSGO. Definitely any other top pro, except maybe the gods. So to me, Kenny S is playing that amazingly. They just need a serviceable player. And I think RpK can be it. I don't know how long it'll take, but I get the sense he can be that. Now, I don't think he'll be the great player as before, but who knows? Maybe there's an outside chance of that, but he doesn't have to be.